Good evening from the Gail Lemron Auditorium in the Captain Willie Miller Building on the campus of Embry-Riddle. Welcome to the Embry-Riddle Speaker Series event. My name is Marc Bernier. In the final installment of our series for the spring of 2016, we talk with a man who has experienced risk, bravery, precision, and thrill. He's going to take your questions from the audience and show you the images of what it's like to be a Thunderbird pilot and a lead pilot. Ladies and gentlemen, for the second time today, as he participated in the Embry-Riddle Veterans Appreciation Day ceremonies, it is our great pleasure to present Lieutenant Colonel Ron Mumm. Colonel, thanks for coming and staying the day with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I want to jump right into this because so many of our guests have had humble beginnings. You were working a summer job, I think as a surveyor, when you killed a snake and then saw a vision. Tell that story.
It's between my freshman and sophomore year in college, I had worked the previous 2 summers as a surveyor. And surveying in Alabama in the summertime is a very hot job, probably like surveying in Florida would be a very hot job. So because I was experienced in it, we were doing a section line. Now a section line is a long straight line. It's probably about 3 miles long. The way we had to get back there was take a truck, drive a truck about 3 miles down this power line road, and then hike about 3 miles into the woods, and then down 3 miles into this section line. And it was nasty stuff. It was thicket and blackberry bushes and thorns, and so we took turns with a thing called a bush axe. A bush axe is it's like a hand. It's curved and it's got a blade on both sides, and it's real good for chopping down small sapling trees and things along those lines. And I'd just taken a big swing with this bush axe in a blackberry thicket, and all of a sudden I heard the rattle of a rattlesnake, and I looked down and it was right there at my feet. Now, I had not before levitated, but I did. I levitated up and back, and kind of with a motion that Serena Williams would be proud of, I came right back around with that bush axe, and I sashimied that rattlesnake. And my heart's racing. I sit down on a tree stump right next to it, because I would have been bitten by this rattlesnake at least 5 or 6 miles away from our vehicle, and another 6 or 7 miles down down a power line road, and a good distance from a hospital. And so my heart's racing. I reach into my water bottle. I'm going to take a sip of my water. There's nothing in it because I forgot to fill it up. The cooler's on the water truck. The night before, I'd pulled 21 ticks off of me from the same project. And I'm sitting there just like you would probably be, and I go, oh, and I look up, and through a break in the canopy, there's a jet with a contrail going over the top. And my conscious thought right at that moment was, I bet he's not having to do any of this. So I chose aviation.
You wanted football, Auburn University, but it didn't happen.
No, I found out that when you get to the college level, the players are bigger, the players are stronger, the players are faster, and so I had the professor of aerospace studies at Auburn RTC. I had an RTC scholarship. I thought I was good enough to have a football scholarship. Unfortunately, only one university thought something similar, and so it didn't pan out for me, but the Air Force ROTC scholarship did. So I had hopes of walking on. And a very wise colonel said, have you ever thought about the value of this pilot thing in the Air Force? And I said, no. And he said, well, do you think you would start? I said, absolutely not. I'm going to try and slug it out as a walk-on and maybe get to play my junior or senior year. Do you realize if you get injured that you may not be able to retain that pilot slot and have an opportunity to go in the Air Force? No, I've never thought about that. I'm an 18-year-old silly kid. And so he said, well, maybe you ought to reconsider that, because let me show you the economic value of what that can be to you for your education. And at the time, going through Air Force pilot training and then the opportunity to go on for follow-on training was probably about a $1 million education. And even an Alabama kid that wasn't smart enough to kill a rattlesnake, I could make that connection. So it wasn't football, it was aviation for me.
Okay. Let's skip, because I know that the audience is going to have questions too. So I want to ask, when do you make this move toward the Thunderbirds? You're flying, you're in the United States Air Force. How did Thunderbirds come about for you?
Well, my wife sitting here can tell you a little bit about that story. You know, the Thunderbirds are all volunteers. So you don't go to the Thunderbirds without holding your hand up and say, I'm willing to do that job. And to be totally honest, you're not transmitting this or recording it or anything, are you?
Yeah. Live, 47,000.
I wasn't 100% sure that I wanted to do that. I was, at the time I'd been flying the F-15 for about 13 years. I had gone to the fighter weapons school, and I was involved in operational testing of the Air Force's newest equipment, and it was really neat stuff. I mean, a couple of months before I threw my name in the hat as a volunteer, I'd had the opportunity to go out and shoot 4 missiles. And so I wasn't 100% sure, but I got a phone call, said, would you consider putting your name in? And I said, absolutely, I'm willing to look at anything. And the big deal for me was the Thunderbirds, once you apply, invite you out to travel with the team. And so I remember distinctly, we went to an air show that they were doing in North Carolina, and the airplanes were fantastic. The team was fantastic. But what really struck me was the impact they had on the Make-A-Wish children. And so you probably don't realize, but one of the highest things that the Make-A-Wish Foundation gets is for an opportunity to interact with the Thunderbirds. And at that particular show, there were 3 or 4 Make-A-Wish kids that were there, and I saw the impact and the life that came to these children that were near death. And it moved me. And I came back and I told my wife, and I said, you know, sweetheart, I wasn't sure, but I am now. And then we went through the selection process. It was, to be 100% honest, I have no idea where they picked me, but I'm glad that they did.
I talked to several of your friends in anticipation of this interview, one of which, Lou Sino, he's here tonight. And I said to him, Lou, should I ask him about the Blue Angels or will he get upset? He goes, no, ask him about that. What's the deal between the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels? Is there a heavy competitiveness? What's the story?
There is a heavy competitiveness. This is a good opportunity for a picture. Let's see if I can reach in here and pull that out, because I actually have a picture of the Blues, and I know they would appreciate me putting their picture up there and giving you an idea of what you can see. So let's put slide number 20 up, please. So the gentleman on the left is the commander of the Blue Angels. His name is George Dom. He was not a friend of mine until the Thunderbird experience, and now he's a lifelong friend. The gentleman on the right is yours truly, and as you can tell from that picture, the Navy guy is trying to give the Air Force guy an earful. So the competition is keen. Both the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels have been performing for over 60 years. Both teams think that they're the best at what they do. Each one flies a little bit of a different air show, but as great rivalries exist, there are also great friendships that exist. And so in this particular case, with that picture of George, that's on the Nellis ramp during an exchange tour. And so what we would do is once a year, we'd do an exchange tour with the Blues and the Thunderbirds, and we'd have an opportunity to go fly with them. And I need to double check and make sure I have another good Blue Angel picture in here for you to see. That would be number 21, the next one. So how about that? There's an Air Force Thunderbird getting a Blue Angel F-18. I had the privilege of flying in the slot and an opportunity to go watch how the Blue Angels did their side of the business. We did the same thing for them. They would fly with us when we put 2-seaters in there. So while the competition is tremendously keen, I will say that it's very friendly, and that in the 2 years that I was boss in the Blue Angel Thunderbird, U.S. Air Force Thunderbird softball competition, the Air Force was undefeated.
Some of our audience members in assembly tonight were wondering, is it true that when you're flying in formation, sometimes you're within mere inches of each other?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have to go find another picture and show you that one too.
We didn't rehearse this, but it's honest.
Let's see if I can get to that one quick enough. 16.
Wow.
I call that a burning hunk of love right there. As you look in that picture, that's the pass and review maneuver. As you can tell, those airplanes' wings are overlapped way more than the 18 inches we normally flew overlapped. Okay, so overlap means the wings are overlapped, and so in that position, the name of the challenge is to line up those red, white, and blue emblems on the wings with the red, white, and blue emblems on the tails. And so that picture was taken just a shade before we completed the roll-up, and you would have had that perfect picture that everybody wants to get. So in that formation, you are so close that if the slot pilot, which is the guy in the slot, if he moves up a little bit high, he tends to push the leader around, and and the wingmen don't like that because they start losing their references and they're so close, it starts to get dangerous. And so, if I felt him, and you could feel him actually moving his bow wave into my airplane, I would say, stop.
Now, forgive me, this is probably a very ignorant question, but we also have a radio audience listening as well. Is there a drafting? There's a lot of NASCAR folks out there. Is there some sort of drafting that goes on between vehicles?
Well, there is. You can't help but have aerodynamic waves coming off the airplane, and it would be disastrous if you flew in there. So we know where those wingtip vortices and aircraft vortices, that F-16 is an entire wing in itself. And so everybody knows where that is, and we avoid that. Now, the scary and silly part of this is at the end of the show, we do a bomb burst maneuver. And the bomb burst maneuver, 4 airplanes go up. I'm sure you've seen it. Everybody goes on 4 different cardinal headings, and the name of the game is to meet back at show center at the same time. Now, the really bad part about that is they're all trying to get as close as they possibly can to the leader. And the leader's concept is don't move. Okay, so you're flying down usually the center line of the runway as the leader, and I could tell if it was going to be a good one, because you can look out there and nobody's moving on your canopy. Everybody's staying the same place. So it's going to, and it would get on the really good ones where I would kind of cringe a little bit.
How long can you be in this formation before it becomes uncomfortable?
Well, that's a great question, Mark, but the reality is the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. So one of the biggest things, it's hard to believe that you can get complacent in close formation, upside down at 100 feet at 500 knots, but you can. And so one of the things that we do is constantly fight the complacency and talk about that and make sure that our focus is there all the time.
Do pilots like yourself, when you end up being a lead, do you favor one person over another? In other words, you may be flying with people that you're very experienced, but you want to have this person on your right side and you want to have this person on your left, as opposed to just any place. I'm thinking like in sports, when people are center icemen, they're comfortable with a left or right winger, but they wouldn't have the right winger ever play the left wing.
Well, I would like to say that you'd be able to do that, but you're not really able to do that. The selection for the team, everybody's a volunteer. In the demonstration, there are six planes that fly in the demonstration. We swap out 3 every year. So there's 3 new people coming on board. And so you actually come on board with a position that's available. So it's an opportunity to come on board. And like all of you, the lesson we learn really quickly is that you can only be as good as your weakest link. And that is true in sports teams, and that's very much true in this business. So what we have to do is we have to quickly elevate somebody that's having a problem, and it could be the leader. The example I'll give is in my first year, we do this maneuver called a bon ton roulé. 4 airplanes in close formation do a max deflections aileron roll at the same time. Now, the name of that game is everybody rolls out, wings level, perfect every time. Because if you roll out about 5 degrees too much, you'll come into the number 2 guy. If you roll out 5 degrees too little, you come into the number 1 guy. And so that's one of those areas that the critique is very significant for the leader. Say, boss, don't be rolling over that far.
During the Thunderbirds period, what kind of physical regimen did you keep to stay in shape, to stay sharp?
I think everybody does. Well, this is a true story, so I'll have to tell you. The Thunderbirds are based in Las Vegas, and I've always been a bit of a gym rat. And so we were flying during the training season. There's two seasons. The training season starts when the show season ends. Show runs from March till November, so training goes from November to March. So when you're on the show season, if you're home, you're practicing Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday is your weekend, and then you're back on the road on Thursday. On the practice season, you're flying 3 times a day with Sunday as your off day. So because our briefings always started at 6 o'clock, I would go to the gym at about 4 a.m. Now, normally, when I was in the test evaluation or other squadrons, I would work out in the evening. But we're in Las Vegas. And so I would go to the gym at 4, and this 24-hour fitness that I went to, I kind of discovered something accidental that was rather pleasant. Apparently, all the showgirls in the shows downtown would go to the gym and do their aerobic workouts because the shows ended at 2. So they'd work out from 3 to 4. So when I was on my bike at 4 a.m., every one of these show ladies would come walking out at 4 o'clock from their exercise. And I told my other teammates about it, and the entire Thunderbird team was in there biking at 4 a.m.
1986, you get what can be best described as a PhD in fighter piloting. And that is around the time, is it not, when Tom Cruise is doing Top Gun? And I often wondered, what do you guys think when you see this? Like, no, that's not how it works. Was that movie accurate to what you were doing?
Yes, it was. The Navy Top Gun movie was similar to what the Air Force has at Nellis. The Fighter Weapons School is a very similar thing. Now, it couldn't come out at a better time. That gentleman that I showed you in the first picture, George Dom, he was actually a bachelor back then. He was a Navy lieutenant, which is the equivalent of an Air Force captain. And he arrived as a Top Gun instructor in 1986, just after Top Gun came out at Navy Miramar. And I asked him what that was like, and all he does is smile at me.
You got the word you were going to do this. You got a call from a general, am I right?
I did.
Phone call?
I did. I was actually out playing in our front yard with my son at the time. We were tossing a ball, and my wife came walking out and said, "Ron, General Bethuram's on the line. He'd like to talk to you." And I knew it was either good news or bad news, and unfortunately, it was very good news. My kids were excited, and the first question my son asked me, he said, "Dad, if you're going to get to be the Thunderbird lead, can you pick who the Thunderbirds fly?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure, but I would think I would have some input in that." And so my little 5 or 6-year-old son at the time said, well, if you can, see if you can get Joe Montana and Han Solo. And now the crazy part is, a year later, I have a picture of my son tossing a football with Joe Montana.
Wow.
And Harrison Ford is they both have flat tops at the same time. They're rubbing each other. So the opportunity to at least do something nice for my son is something I'll never forget.
Colonel, if I'm not mistaken, the season is basically March to November. Is that how it was?
That's
working?
correct.
What's that like? How intense is it, and how difficult is it for you to go through that period? Because I'm thinking of the precision that's involved. You have a family. How tough was that?
Believe it or not, once you start the show season, it's actually a little bit easier than the practice season. And the Air Force has a way of saying train like you fight. And so we trained much harder than when the air show actually came on. And everybody trained. It wasn't just the pilots, it was the enlisted members that were part of the show line, and everybody was gearing up for going out on the show. Once you actually went out on the show, for the pilots, it became fly 1 time a day instead of fly 3 times a day. The burden shifted to that fabulous team of enlisted members that we would bring our airplanes in, and the next day those airplanes were perfect again. And so the shifts, the 2 shifts that would run that airplane, the workload went to them. Now, as far as travel for the family, I encouraged, matter of fact, I tried to do this in the scheduling to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to go be with their family at some show. And we had this event for families called a FARCL. And FARCL stands for Family and Relatives, Kinfolks, and Limited Extensions. And so what a FARCL event was, is it was done before every air show. The family members would come and the entire team would be there. And we would have an opportunity to talk specifically about the accomplishments that that team member, in front of his family, speak very glowing, let him have a chance to meet the team and do all that before the show. And it was really a special way to bring the families to be a part of the Thunderbird experience.
During your aviation career, were you ever injured or hurt?
No, I can't think of a time that I was.
During the time that you do this, when is it that your body and your mind speak to you and you say, maybe I shouldn't do this anymore?
Well, that's more like my golf swing than my flying. I think you reach a point where fighter flying becomes a young man's game, a younger man's game. I did it till I was 40 years old and loved every minute of it. There are folks that have done it beyond that. Aerobatic, Sean Tucker's still doing a great job with aerobatic flying. And he and I are the same age. So you can do it, but it takes being in shape and it takes a desire to want to do it. It's you know, those airplanes right there are capable of 9 Gs. And so to a lot of people that don't know what 9 Gs feels like, your airplane, your head weighs roughly 30 pounds. And so under 9 Gs, your head now weighs 270 pounds and your little neck muscles are all you have. So most fighter pilots get some type of neck injury because they're looking around their shoulder like that and their neck muscles aren't strong enough to sustain that 9 G. So now thankfully for me, I tried to keep the bad guys in front of me.
One of the reasons we asked you to come to Embry-Riddle and speak this morning and then tonight was because you've touched so many lives in your career. I think it was some time ago you were asked to come to the graduation ceremony in Colorado, and you spoke to the graduates. But as I recall, and I heard you address it this morning, you've spoken to parents, and then you speak to those who are going to take their oath. And you do that for a specific reason. Why?
I don't care who you are, if you serve in the Air Force, or if you serve in the Army, Navy, Marine, or Coast Guard. If you join the Armed Forces, it affects your family, it affects your parents, it affects your loved ones. It's that effect. And to some, it's a scary thing because our world can be a scary place. But I want the family members to know that our services are a family extension. And while you had them, Mom and Dad, from 0 to 18 or 19, watch what happens when we administer the oath of office and they go from being a 19-year-old young lady or a 19-year-old young man to becoming that representative of our country in the service. It's a magical thing. And I've had so many parents after that event come up to me and go, thank you for doing that. So for me, it's important to make that connection. And it's probably just as important for that young person to say, okay, good, I'm ready to fly away from this nest and go take a chance. I know it was for me.
Other people in your family aviators? Do you come from an aviation family?
My dad was a German immigrant that fled Nazi Germany when he was 14, and enlisted in the Air Force, and they wouldn't let him go back to fight the Germans, so they sent him to the Japanese theater. He was in the theater in the flying the hump, but he was not a pilot. As he will tell you, he was a baggage kicker out of C-47s. And when the war ended, he was reunited with his family. So not a military family. It turned out that my brother went to West Point, flew helicopters, but other than that, no.
Was there someone when you were coming up that you used as a role model, or someone that you thought had a virtue to aviation? You said, I want to be this guy.
You know, it's amazing that the first time I ever saw the Thunderbirds fly, they were flying in T-38s in Montgomery, Alabama. And my mom took me down there, and we sat there, and I don't know, I was maybe 14 years old, and I was just moved by the Thunderbirds. So it was an interesting experience to see that. I never thought that I would have the opportunity to do that. And then here, quite a few years later, I still marvel at the fact that I had an opportunity to do that.
It's a glamorous life, is it not?
Well, you'd have to ask my wife about that.
Is it a glamorous life? Is it hard? She's not mic'd. Is it hard being the wife of a Thunderbird pilot?
Well, it wasn't for me, but yes, they get a lot of attention, and everybody wants to be their best friend and take them home.
For anybody not picking it up, everybody wants to be their best friend and get a lot of attention. So you got to make sure that you keep Heidi, there, otherwise she could disappear into the background, right?
Exactly.
Okay. You told a story this morning. In 1996, Thunderbirds go to Romania, and for many of those people, it was the first time they'd ever seen anything like this. This is 96. Berlin Wall's already down. Countries are becoming more independent and on their own. But it was almost a terrifying moment for you, Colonel. What happened?
It was. A brief Romanian history. In 1989, a revolution in Romania started. Where Romania sits in Europe, it's kind of the gateway for Europeans to go into the Middle East and for the Middle East to go into Europe. So throughout the centuries, it's been a conquered and transited land. After World War II, the communist regime came into power. A gentleman named Ceausescu, and had one of the most brutal regimes that there could be. So in '89, the wall started coming down. In '90, the revolution in Romania started, and the Thunderbirds were dispatched to Eastern Europe to do our ambassador in blue thing in 1996. And we were going to Timișoara, Romania, which was the site of the Romanian Revolution. I didn't realize it, but the real powerful secret police in Romania had just been tamed a couple of months before we got there. They didn't give me that in my briefing. So anyway, we're staying in a hotel in Timișoara. At the time, they had brownouts, so the power would go out. I turned the spigot on or turned the shower on to take a shower, and the water ran brown. It was not a place that had all the services that one would expect. But the people were so happy and so excited to touch democracy and freedom because they had not had it for 50 years. And so the very next day, we did an air show on a day like today. Beautiful blue skies, just absolutely gorgeous, and the city of Timișoara came out to see us. At the end of the air show, normally what happens is we taxi the 6 F-16s in, we shut down and raise the canopies. We complete our little performance by getting out, saluting the maintenance guys, and sending a thumbs up to the crowd. Right at the thumbs up to the crowd, the 50,000 people that were Romanians broke the lines and charged the airplanes. And my initial thought was, oh my goodness, what's going to happen here? And all they wanted to do was touch and feel and be a part of the democracy and freedom which they had just witnessed. So the best we could do was hop up on the wingtips and shake hands from the wingtips to keep from getting crushed by the mob that charged us.
Wow.
So it reinforced, as I told the veterans this morning, the legacy of what the United States has been for the last nearly 250 years of populating that thought of democracy and freedom in the world. And I hopefully shared that with the veterans this morning.
Are there periodic checks for pilots such as yourself during the days that you're flying, like airline pilots go through?
Absolutely. I take a flight physical Class 1 physical every 6 months. And then I take an executive physical as part of that. So I do 3 physicals a year.
There are young people who are listening to radio. Some will hear it on delay, and in our audience as well. What's your advice to anyone who's a young aviator?
Oh, it's really simple. Is if I can do it, you can. That's number one. And please dream big, because once you dream big, then the world is available for you. So don't be afraid to reach for that brass ring if it's out there. And there's so many success stories that can do that. Now it is work in the aviation thing, because you've got to build the flying time and the hours and all the things associated with that. But it's a wonderful experience. I mean, I think the best office seat in the world is looking out the front of an airplane.
The industry expedition, the NBIA, I believe it's called, I understand that you were at one of these things once with a guy, your counterpart from the Blue Angels, and you guys did almost like a show, and you took this on the road. This is what I was told. Do you remember this?
Oh, we still do. Yeah, every now and then.
What's that like? And I mean, I understand it's quite entertaining.
Well, it's an opportunity for me to pick on the Navy, and I really enjoy doing that. And so there's some of that goes on. And then the second piece of the equation is we are able to talk about the 5 important items, I call them the 5 C's, that make a jet team work, or make any team work for that experience. You know, you've got to have the character, you've got to have the commitment, and you've got to have the connection. And that's the definition of a team right there when you put those 3 in there. And then you add competence and communication, and you fill that out. So we take that and we develop on that theme a little bit, and actually do a little bit of some video comparisons between the Blues and the Thunderbirds, and do it to try and explain how you can take normal people like Ron Mumm and let them do something extraordinary because of the power of the team.
Colonel, when you're together as a unit, do your co-pilots become close friends? Do you become close because you're working in a very dangerous environment and you got to trust each other? What's the relationship like?
Well, it's more than just the pilots. You become very close with the enlisted team members as well. You know, if you've seen a Thunderbird show or you've seen a Blue Angel show, the pilots don't do a pre-flight. Okay, pilots walk up, the enlisted member standing at the airplane salutes them, and then he goes out and flies 26 or 30 minutes of low-altitude aerobatics. And he never pre-flights the airplane. So there's a large degree of trust that go into that. And those airplanes are some of the most flown airplanes in the Air Force. So those airplanes come home every night, and another shift puts those airplanes back together, and then they go back out again. So you asked the question about friendship. It's more than just friends. It's a lifetime experience that you never forget those guys. And they were compatriots and they were friends.
We've talked to, in this series, probably about 9 combat veterans or aviators who were in intense work, and then their assignment is over and they either move to the private sector or they move to something else. A few of them told us it was a tough mental adjustment, particularly for those who served in combat. When you stopped flying every day, as you make your way eventually to Bell South, is that something that's tough inside? I mean, you make a decision, or is it not?
No, you miss flying the high performance airplane. You know, you still have the camaraderie of staying in touch with your friends, but you certainly miss flying the high. You know, there'd be a couple of times there in the first year or two that I'd have a dream or something about how much fun it was flying the airplane, and I'd have to go sit on my back porch and rock for about 15 minutes with a glass of scotch.
When you went over to Bell South, what were you doing over there?
I came into Bell South as part of their flight operation, and ultimately became their director of flight operations. And so they had an international flight operation and a domestic flight operation, and a pretty large organization, about 65 people that were involved in that.
Colonel, is there a big takeaway for you when you left the Air Force? Is there something that becomes the big takeaway for you?
Well, you know, the big takeaway from me is the amazing capability that exists when you mix really talented people and really incredible equipment, and then give the people and the equipment an opportunity to say, now go do it. And with that, it's amazing what our services have done. In my case, it was the Air Force. But if you look at the ingenuity of our military people, it's fantastic.
We're going to take some questions from the audience in a few moments, but first, you brought a series of photos, and you showed us a few of them. Would you take us through all of them?
Yeah, sure.
We're going to begin at one for our friends up in control, Tony. We can go to the beginning. Colonel, take us through these memories.
Okay. Let's see, if you'll stick the number 2 up there. So what that picture is right there that's the Delta formation of the Thunderbirds being chased by our operations officer with a photographer in the airplane. And so what's unique about that picture, as you look at it, is everybody's upside down, including the photographer who's having to take a picture like that. And so that's actually over Indian Springs, where in 1981 we lost 4 Thunderbirds in the worst accident we've ever had. So you can't fly over that without feeling reverent to that event. You'll notice the paint on the bottom is the paint of a Thunderbird, a specific design on the airplane. So, and then let's go to the number 3, please. Is a Thunderbird emblem stuck in there. The next one, please. During the 50th anniversary of the Air Force, the Thunderbirds had the privilege of going to every major command that was in the Air Force and doing an air show. It was a really treat to have the opportunity to do that. This specific photograph was taken in Durango, Colorado, and then ultimately an artist there converted that into a painting. Now it turns out the artist is a gentleman named Mike Cooney, and Mike Cooney and I are brothers from different mothers. We have exactly the same birthday. So when Mike and I went out and found out we had the same birthday, we were at a restaurant in Durango, Colorado called Carver's, which incidentally has the best blueberry pancakes in the world. I'm on a lifelong search for the best blueberry pancakes and the best margarita. And so currently Durango and my wife are tied for first place for blueberry pancake. Nonetheless, he made a painting out of that and presented that painting to me of that exact picture. And what's interesting, in the bottom right-hand corner of the painting that I have is a stack of Carver's blueberry pancakes. Next one, please. It gives you another view of the Delta formation as you see it. You notice in that particular formation, the missile rails are aligned as opposed to the really close formation that we had. That's the formation that we would fly in the first part of the season. That's called close it up. And then when we got more proficient at certain maneuvers, we would go into the overlap position. Next one, please. That's another emblem. We'll skip through those. Next one. The Thunderbird hangar in Nevada is the oldest hangar in Nevada. And so this picture was taken in the Thunderbird hangar. We have a giant 40-foot flag that hangs from the ceiling to the floor. And on each one of the walls in there are the countries that every Thunderbird has been to in the history of the team. And that particular painting was done at my change of command, or that photo was taken at my change of command ceremony for the team. Speaking of the flag panel, next slide please. Every time the Thunderbirds visit another foreign country, they add something to the flag panel. It was 1996, and we've probably gotten a little spoiled recently with flybys of Blue Angels and Thunderbirds at Super Bowls and Daytona and things like that. That didn't used to happen. In 1996, one of the people that was setting up the Summer Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia, happened to be an Air Force alumni. And they thought, wouldn't it be cool if we got the Thunderbirds, who used to, and the Blues too, only did air shows, to fly by at the last note of the national anthem for the '96 Olympics in Atlanta. So they approached us, we asked permission of the Air Force and got permission. Now, no team had done flybys before. This is 1996. So we're holding in Atlanta. I'm holding right over the 1,400-foot tower, and the run-in line that they put us on meant I had to go over another 1,400-foot tower, 3 miles from Fulton County Stadium, where they were, now Turner Stadium, where they were having the Olympic opening ceremonies, and then come over the scoreboard at low altitude with the smoke on, everybody in formation, and do it at the last note of Whitney Houston singing the national anthem. So we did everything if you're not cheating, you're not trying, and something like that. So we had a guy up on the scoreboard with all the security guys that were up there. He was on the radio, and we knew the run-in line took 1 minute and 48 seconds. That's how long Whitney was going to take to sing the national anthem. And she was very consistent. So we turned around on the run-in line right at that's why the emblem of the opening ceremonies is there. And we start that run-in. And I have a radar in that F-16, and I'm looking downwind, and over the stadium, I've never seen so many airplanes. There's banner tows, there's blimps. I'm going, oh my goodness, we're not going to be able to do it. And so I start the run-in, and I'm right on time. The F-16 has a cue that they can display in the HUD. And I'm right on time on the run-in, and I know we've got to go over that tower. And so my plan is to go as close as I can to that tower and then duck down and get into the stadium and come right over the scoreboard. And so number 4 later told me that he thought he was looking up at the flashing red light at the tower because he was tucked in the slot. We missed it by plenty, but it looked close to him. So we dive in. What happens is the great sea parts. All of a sudden, these guys know we're coming, and the radar, everybody kind of clears out. And I'm going, all right. And so we had briefed the OPSO who was up on the roof. We briefed him that when he saw the jets, and he could hear the jets, key the mic so that we could hear our arrival. We could slow down a little bit, because he'd see the jets about 1.5 miles out. So now we're coming in 6 airplanes. We're doing about 420 knots. We're right on the timeline, and he keys the mic, and we can hear Whitney go, "For the land of the free and the home of the," and then all you hear is jet noise. As the airplane goes roaring over. And so the head of the Olympic Committee, I can't remember his name, is standing on. President Clinton is standing there, and Billy Payne, who runs the Masters, was heading the Olympics for Atlanta, are both standing there. And NPC flashes onto the airplanes as they go over, and then they flash onto Clinton, and the president goes, "That was freaking cool." Now, in a gross lack of air discipline on my part, we make the turnout. We call Atlanta control and told them that we're climbing up to altitude. We have to make a big right turn because Hartsfield is right there, busiest airport in the world. And as we come over, it's twilight. The fireworks have now stopped. And as we fly over, as we climb out, I go, "Hey guys, loosen up a little bit. I want to just look." So we loosen up the formation because we're about 10,000 feet. And now we're flying right back over the stadium. And so I flip over upside down to look down into the stadium at what we just saw, because I was kind of busy on that last front-end. Well, I have the conscious thought as I'm upside down to look left and look right, and all of us are upside down. That's what that's about. Let's jump to number 10.
Physically fit.
Yep. My mom always liked that red show suit. I always wondered about that. I've got a story that I could share, and we'll skip over number 11 and go to number 13. I'm an Auburn graduate. I went to undergraduate, got my degree from Auburn. And the Auburn magazine came out and followed the Thunderbird team for about 3 weeks. And they wrote a very nice article on us about that. The interesting part about that specific airplane, when they snapped that picture, is that is actually not my primary crew chief. They happened to be in the arming area when I was about to step to a spare. And so the way you did a Thunderbird show is you didn't let the crowd know that you had a problem. If your airplane started and you could taxi it, you taxied to the end of the runway where we kept the spare. And then everybody on the team hated when the leader had to go to the spare because, you know, it was really rushed and everything. And, you know, you want the leader kind of calm and controlled. So in that case, as Eli was there, I was jumping to the spare. The next one, because it was, 14 please. Because it was the 50th anniversary of the Air Force, the U.S. Postal Service did a stamp for the Thunderbirds. And so it was kind of nice to be able to make presentos of people for a 32-cent stamp. 15, please. Thunderbird patch. I can't stop at this slide without telling you about the patch. Every Thunderbird member, as I told you, is a volunteer. Every Thunderbird team member has to earn the patch. Now, even in 1996, I had some people question me about what we called the 21-day program to get the patch. So what happened is when we had a new person come into the squadron, be it officer or enlisted, and because the team is mostly enlisted, about 140 in total, it took 21 days for them to go around and meet everybody, to learn the history of the Thunderbirds. And then they took a test at 7 days, they took a test at 14 days, they took a test at 21 days, or 20 days. On the 21st day, the entire Thunderbird team closed the doors on that oldest hangar in Nevada. We gathered at the center patch in that hangar. The team, all 140. And that person that had just been through the 21-day program comes marching out there and stands and answers questions on the Thunderbird history that the leader is asking him. Now you talk about pressure. I mean, that's pressure. And so I've had people say, well, Ron, didn't you feel like that was demeaning? And I said, oh no, because CNN's not going to care when they stick the mic in his face and start asking him about Thunderbird history. He's a representative to us. I think that moment right there is a part of it. But there's another piece that's more important. Because what happens is during that conversation, the boss kind of stands up. That person's standing at attention, and the boss walks around a little bit. And then somewhere in there, the boss reaches into his pocket and pulls out that patch. And when that guy's not expecting it, you reach right over and slap him on the chest with that patch. And he grabs the patch and holds it. What happens next is even more amazing. Because now a roar goes up in that hangar. Ken and I were talking about that the other day. It's a roar you never forget. And then what happens is your family comes walking through the 2 doors in there. And the Thunderbirds all line up, all 140, from number 1 to number 140 in sequence by rank. And everybody goes over and welcomes the new Thunderbird, the new Thunderbird spouse, the new Thunderbird children by their name. It's a very moving experience. No one ever forgets it. So that patch ceremony, the patch equivalent, becoming a part of the team, that's that connection that I was talking about, the 5 C's. Ken, do you remember that?
You gave me my patch.
Small world. Let's see if I can jump to, we've already done 16, but put that one up again because I like looking at that. Oh yeah. Let's go to 17. A little bit dark and ominous this one is. I use this when I talk about the Thunderbird critique experience. You know, I told you before, it's pretty tough when you get critiqued on every maneuver you do. So the Thunderbirds grade every maneuver on a 0 to 10 scale. 10 is perfect, 0 is unsafe. Every maneuver. We even graded the musical hits to make sure that the music, when they did the bomb burst, was right at the right point. All of that was important. So what we would do is aggregate each one of those maneuvers, each one of those things, and we would score it on a 0 to 10 scale. And then the leader had to call the commander of the Air Force, actually the commander of ACC, and tell him what the score was for the Thunderbirds that day. Now, 0 to 10, and it's pretty tough grading. Would you be surprised if I told you that our average score was about a 4? And that the best score I ever had was a 7 as a team. So, if I were to have you, let's do a little audience participation, have you look at that picture and grade that, just what you see on a 0 to 10 scale, what would you give that?
6.
A 6. Why?
Because they're farther apart, and the one in the middle at the back is pretty close to the leader, so I think that the maneuver to me looks like 6.
You, sir, should be a Thunderbird. So in that picture, that's the first air show I ever did. That was in Warner Robins, Georgia. We were about to stop the air show for that thunderstorm that it's filmed against. My brother took that picture. I remember that score. That's the delta roll. So you got 6 airplanes in formation. You start at about 300 feet, and you get that baby rolling. And the object's just to be inverted at show center, and then come out on the other end at 300 feet. Everything's supposed to be symmetrical. But if you look at that picture, do you notice that the 2 inside wingmen are not symmetrical? Okay? That's called a TT. That means teeny tiny. That was only 1 point off. But just as you saw, those outside guys, they're not symmetrical either. So that was a little more. That was 2 points off. That slot guy, he's supposed to be lined up right behind the leader. I don't think he's there, is he? Okay? So that's another point off. But then there's always the responsibility for the leader. So as I told you, the leader's supposed to start that baby rolling and be inverted at show center. That day, the leader, yours truly, missed show center by 1,000 feet on the other end. So we got more points taken off. So as good as that looks, that's a 3 on a 10.
Wow.
And now you know how to grade like a Thunderbird.
Wow. We're going to come to the audience, start thinking about your questions for Colonel Mumm. As soon as we get through the pictures, we're going to take your questions right here. At the bottom, 2 microphones will ask you to come down. What have you got left, Colonel?
Let's jump to 27. This maneuver is not done anymore. It was a line abreast loop, and it ended in a fatality of T-38s. But this photo was taken in the F-16 as kind of a memorial, so I have it in here. If you go to the next picture, this is what you don't want to have happen.
Wow.
This happened several years ago. It was an error in altimeter setting on a low altitude maneuver. And while we haven't had a Thunderbird fatality since '81, in this case we lost the airplane. And without question, it was tragic. In this particular case, it's a max climb to a split S, and you come out on the other end. Because the altimeter was set in error, he was too low. Now you can see that the airplane swapped ends, but that vector was still down. Thankfully, the pilot made the right decision to eject. So let's go to 29 and leave 29 up. This is a picture that I usually end the presentation on, and it's a multifaceted picture. I don't remember where it was taken. I don't remember the circumstance of what it was taken, but I just love the coloration and the symbolism in there, and so I like to have that sitting there as I take your questions.
Let's take them from the audience now. If you'll make your way down here. Anyone at all, if you have a question, opposed to, thank you. And we'll take them from both sides. We'll go from right to left. So make your way down here. And good evening. You're first for Colonel Ron Mumm.
Thank you for coming tonight. Are these aircraft combat ready, or are they tricked out for performance?
Both. And let me clarify that. Unlike the Navy airplanes, which are strictly made for performance, these airplanes have the gun removed and then the paint put on for the air show. But the gun, with the gun removed, they can install mineral oil to create the smoke, and that's where the tank is for that. But we wanted the airplanes to be combat capable, and so what we do is we demonstrate every so many years the ability to pull that smoke out, put the gun back in, and go out and have a completely combat-capable airplane. So it's convertible for either.
Let's come right over here. Your question now, right into the microphone if you would.
My question is, how did you get into like the flight test portion? Because I noticed they never go into detail about it, because everybody loves the Thunderbirds as much as I do.
There's two types of testing in the Air Force. There's developmental testing, and then there's operational testing. And the part I was involved in was the operational testing. And so what that specific part was not making sure that the system was designed to do, fly at a certain regime, meet its mil spec. The test pilots did all that stuff that were from Edwards. The operational guys were both at Nellis and at Eglin. And what our thing was we wanted to make sure that it all integrated together into the weapons system. And so that was the reason we had the operational test, and it was very specific. It was a lot of radar evaluation and missile shooting, and to make sure that those airplanes enjoyed the reputation that they so deservedly have.
So much.
Thank you. Right over here, your question for Colonel Mumm. Still an opportunity for people from the audience to ask you questions. Come on down. Go ahead, sir.
I'm curious, Colonel, how much back pressure are you holding in the F-16 throughout the maneuvers? You trim nose down, is that correct?
Every one of us.
And how many pounds approximately would you be holding?
Well, it's interesting on the F-16 because it's a capacitor. I mean, it's your stick is sending an electric signal to the fly-by-wire.
That's why I'm curious. I've flown the simulator, and my son's got about 17 years flying it in the Air Force. Then I flew F-84s with there at Luke. But I've always heard that they're holding all that back pressure through all that, your entire show. But I've wondered with the fly-by-wire setup, what you're doing with, if you're ever at neutral, or like the Angels I heard the lead talk about keeping back pressure in during that whole maneuver. That's got to be fatiguing.
Well, it is, but let me tell you why. I can remember distinctly in my life where 3 times I was one with the airplane. And when I was doing this job, I physically was one with the airplane. I could almost think something and it could happen. And that's, the athletes call that being in the zone. So what really happens when you get in that zone is every airplane, no matter who makes it or how they make it, has a null. There's a little place in the flight control where you can move it all the way around and nothing's going to happen. Even the F-16 has that. And so what happened is we didn't want that. We wanted the positive feedback so that there was no null in there. That's the reason we trim full forward. I fly a Global Express now and I fly a Cirrus now. And in every condition I trim forward. No, not full forward, but I trim forward so that I have positive feedback to give me a reference on how to fly the airplane.
My first show was when I was in pre-flight at Lackland, my first Thunderbird, and that was 1955. And 2 years later, I was at Luke going through the F-84 program when the Thunderbirds were still there. It's been a long, long time.
Well, thank you.
Enjoyed every one of them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming, sir. Over here now, your question for Colonel Mumm.
Colonel, have you yourself ever had to punch out of an aircraft?
Thankfully, no.
And another question, why do they have to test those engines at 3 o'clock in the morning? I spent 12 months at Nellis, and I know when they test those engines.
I don't have an answer for that one.
Let's come over here and your question for Colonel Mumm.
Colonel, thank you for your service and thank you for being here tonight. My question for you is, obviously becoming a fighter pilot, let alone a Thunderbirds pilot, is a very selective process. What was your primary motivation during, as you could say, maybe doing the dirty work or doing the stuff that wasn't fun leading up to your career as a fighter pilot, even in college?
What a fantastic question. Bless my mom and dad, but they had 4 kids, 4 mouths to feed, and I was the first one to go to college. So there wasn't a lot of money to spare. And so I had an Air Force scholarship, and I had a couple of jobs. And the reason I had a couple of jobs is because I discovered in my first quarter in college that I really wanted to get to know some of those co-eds that were there. And you know, I found out it took more than whatever little money I was getting, so I had a few jobs. Now, what I found out at the end of the first semester is if you have 2 or 3 jobs, you can't make your grades as good as you need to. And so I learned that lesson pretty quickly, so I kind of found that happy balance. And I think part of that was working and finding the balance to be able to get to the next goal, which for me was let's graduate, let's get to pilot training, let's do as good as we can in pilot training. And one of the things that I found out is that I wasn't as good at testing as I hoped I would be. Now, I was pretty good at flying, but I was not necessarily good at testing. We had this great guy. We had this guy named Fred Wolf. We all called him Frederick Botanica. Out of the 11 tests in pilot training, he didn't miss a question. Nobody had ever done that before, okay? So I had Fred teach me how to test, and I wish I'd have had Fred when I was a freshman in college. So sometimes the hard part is, in my opinion, is figuring out that balance to get to where it is you want to go to. But don't be afraid to chase it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right over here, sir, your question.
Colonel, do you have a cargo craft that you have with all your spare parts and spare engines in case you have problems when you're out touring?
We do. So there are, when it was my watch on the Thunderbirds, we had an East Coast engine, we had a West Coast engine. And wherever we traveled, we usually had some airlifter that went with us, and the crew was ready to go with us if we had an engine change. So a lot of times, if you can throw up, I'll give you the number again. Put up number 10, please. May I stand up and do an explanation for you?
Sure.
You see that intake behind that handsome
Yes,
guy in red? That intake is about that high off the ground. And that thing produces, what, 28,000 pounds of thrust? So that intake pulls a lot of stuff in there. So we had chronic foreign object damage on the front end of those engines. And so in that particular case, one of the things that we had to do was we had to sweep the flight line. So all of our enlisted, all of our officers would line up, and we'd get any pebble we could find, and we'd walk the entire way those F-16s were going to go. Because by golly, if there was a rock or a screw, that F-16 engine would vacuum it up. And so, and a lot of times, even though we did that, we didn't get it. So how many engine changes would you say we did in a show season? I'd say 2 or 3. At least 3. Yeah, so about 3.
Second question, is the fuel that your airplanes are using, is it tested even more critically before it's put into your aircraft?
Good question.
That's a great question. No, it's not. The good news about those Pratt motors is they'll just about burn anything. So,
Very good.
and so it was not.
Right over here, your question. Good evening.
Sir, the first ever Thunderbird show I saw was Wings and Waves 2014, and I absolutely fell in love. I would credit the Thunderbirds for changing my life with the same thing you talked about with your first air show you saw when you were a kid. And then next year I'm going to be going to pilot training and for the Air Force as an ROTC graduate. And yesterday in Lake City I had the chance to ask all 6 Thunderbirds what they would say was advice in going through pilot training. And sir, I ask you the same question. What type of advice would you give somebody about to go through UPT?
I would say it will be the opportunity of a lifetime, because rarely do you get an opportunity to go spend an entire year and all you're going to do is study aviation. And everything about that undergraduate pilot training is focused to make you the best pilot possible. And so I would say, 1, enjoy it. 2, look forward to the challenge. And then the third thing is, don't be afraid to burn the midnight oil, as you probably have done now to get to that point. Don't be afraid to burn the midnight oil, because at the other end is the opportunity for you to go do whatever it is you want to go do.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Sir, your question. We have students way back there. You guys ought to come down here and ask your question as well. Sir.
Colonel, thank you very much for the informative and educational talk. Certainly, it was very helpful. Question I have is, in case there is a threat from an alien plane, are these the planes used, or are there other planes that can come to a defense? And how many of these are around the country? So somewhere, if needed, they can get there in a hurry.
I don't know the exact answer. These are not the planes that sit alert. I have sat alert. And so I've sat alert in F-15s. And we used to sit alert, you know, on the East Coast in Langley, Virginia. And at the time, there were airplanes in Maine, there were airplanes in Virginia, there were airplanes in DC, there were airplanes in Jacksonville down the eastern seaboard. I don't know where they are now, and I don't know how many they are. Sorry, I can't answer your question.
And one other question, as far as the speed that you have flown the fastest and the altitude that it can go up to.
Oh, okay. I've had both those airplanes at F-15 and F-16 as fast as I dare take them at low altitude. Now, both airplanes will fly in excess of Mach 2, and I've done that. But where it's really exciting is when you're down about 100 feet and you're watching the cactuses go whizzing by at 800 knots.
To our left, your question for Colonel Mumm.
I was curious, how do the Thunderbirds determine what aircraft you fly, and how often do you guys change the aircraft you fly?
That's a great question. A lot of it depends. When the Thunderbirds went from the F-4s to the T-38s, it was a fuel crisis in our country in the 70s. And so part of that was fuel conservation. When they went from the T-38s to the F-16s, it was a transitional period because we'd had a horrible accident with the T-38s. So we wanted to move away from that platform. So they started with the F-16A, and then the Air Force phased out the F-16A, so they went to the F-16C. I flew the F-16C. They are still flying the F-16C, but now they're flying a different block series. We flew Block 32s, and I think now the show is flying Block 52s, which are a different engine and a newer model aircraft, as they have phased out the older F-16s. You're welcome.
To the right here, sir.
Thank you, Mark. Colonel, thanks for being here. Curious, did you fly the airplanes to Romania yourselves?
Did I? I did not. Well, I flew the Thunderbirds there, but I've never been to Romania again since then.
I was curious if you had fold-down nose trim on that long flight.
Actually, the beautiful part about that is that the F-16 has an attitude and heading hold.
Yeah.
And we were actually talking about this before we came here. You know, that F-16 seat, in the F-15, it's vertical like that. In the F-16, it's reclined. And so you're kind of sitting there leaning back. And there's some challenges to that, especially on a 14-and-a-half-hour flight. That little sit-back mode kind of cuts the circulation off in your leg. So when we went to Europe, we went from Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas to Lakenheath, England, which was a 14-and-a-half-hour flight. And we landed there, and everybody had come out to greet us. It was a big deal because the Thunderbirds were going to Europe. And I tried to stand up, and I didn't realize I didn't have any blood in my leg. I almost fell out of the F-16. I was glad I fell back in and kind of had to gain some circulation. So no, I didn't fly with nose down trim, but I flew with no blood in my legs.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir. On the left here.
I have another question. With your extensive career in the Air Force, what is your opinion with unmanned aircraft systems and how it's being developed right now?
Excellent.
That's a great question. I think our UAVs are doing amazing things. We had a conversation at dinner Friday night about some of the capabilities that you can bring to that for agriculture and for services associated with mowing and things like that. So there are applications that are coming that we can't even conceive of right now. We were out there in the early days when I was flying at Nellis in '96. It was the early days of the Predator program. And the Predators were kept at Indian Springs, and we would practice over Indian Springs. And so we've come so far in the last 20 years with the capability of those airplanes, of those platforms, to do so many things. The future is coming. Now, ask me about that with passengers. How would I be, not as an aviator, but as a passenger to get on a UAV? So I'll share a story with you. I was driving here from our home in Destin, and my wife recently got a new car, and she allowed me to drive it. And this car has adaptive cruise control, and it has lane assist. And so the cool thing about lane assist is if you push this button, you can take your hands off the steering wheel and it'll ping off the... Now what I found is that the passenger on that airplane, on that car, my wife, didn't like that very much.
No, because I'm in the UAS program, and we all agree we still have to have pilots for like transport at least. But cargo, anything else, we're pretty open-minded for those.
That's where I am too.
Thank you.
I think my wife's there too.
Precious minutes, go ahead, sir.
Colonel, could you explain the design of the Thunderbirds patch and how it was made up?
Oh, yeah, I'd be happy to. Let's see if we can get that patch back up for you real quick. That was number 15. Let's see if I have my dates right. 58? In 1958, the Thunderbirds, the first Thunderbird squadron was constituted in Phoenix, Arizona. And the Brand Y, those Navy guys, the Blue Angels, had beat us to inception by a couple of years. So the Air Force was going to develop this jet team. And so it founded itself in Phoenix, Arizona. And at the time, what they wanted to do was they wanted to find something that was associated with Phoenix, because they didn't know this thing was going to grow and last for 60, 70 years. And so the original Thunderbird emblem was one that was associated with the original squadron from Phoenix, and it lasted the test of time. Now what's changed over the years is in the middle, the airplanes. So it started with F-84s, and now we've got F-16s. So that's one of the significant changes that have gone. But everything else that's in there, the shield, the script, all of that stuff is from the original team that was designed in 1958. Does that answer your question?
One other question quickly.
Very quickly.
With regard to the T-38 accident in the desert, could you tell us briefly why that happened, and more importantly, what steps were taken after that to ensure that would never happen again?
I'm happy to do that. Let's put number 26 up there. The Thunderbirds used to do in the T-38 a line abreast loop. Now, when you're flying formation, and I've got to use Mark as a training aid, a visual aid here.
You need to get up for this one?
No, you stay. You're the leader. Okay, so when you're flying formation and you're in the wing position, you're looking at Mark like this. So it's a pretty natural line of sight. But when you're line abreast, like this was in this, you move way forward to Mark, and you actually get shoulder to shoulder. And so what happens is you turn your head to keep track of him, to maintain the reference, and you lose the spatial orientation of what's going on around you. So in that particular maneuver, not in the F-16s, but in the T-38, it was a line abreast loop, and then the leader got too low, and the wingman never got the ground rush because they were looking like this as opposed to seeing what could come up. And so consequently, all four of them perished in the accident. It was a horrible accident. To this day, we do not do a line abreast loop.
Thank you, sir. 2 questions left. Ma'am, you're next.
Colonel, thank you for serving our country, and also may I say thank you for the presentation tonight. My question is, do you have any female Thunderbird pilots?
Absolutely, and I'm proud to report that the Air Force does and the Navy does not.
Very good.
That's another thing I like to do with George when we're doing our presentation. We've actually had quite a few lady pilots flying the demonstration. And we found that they have incredible skills and they connect with the public like no one ever has before.
Sir, regarding the training season, what type of steps do you take to bring everyone closer together, to get more familiar with each other, especially with the pilots that have already been there for a year and the ones that are brand new to the team?
It starts off like anything. You start with small steps and you go to big steps. So you start off, the solos will go out by themselves and you'll practice doing the flip turn. Now you think flipping over on your back is not a big deal, but you have to do it at exactly zero G or you put a kink in the smoke. And remember, we're pretty tough graders, so you're not going to kink the smoke. So it's the crawl and then walk, and then you do it in formation, the two-ship formation. And meanwhile, the leader's flying with number 2, he's flying with number 3, he's flying with number 4, but you're not putting them all together. And so you do a whole bunch of that in onesies and twosies. Then you put together a 3Z in the diamond, the solos start doing. Then you put together 4, and then you start stepping it down. So we have step down targets. We have a real disciplined approach to making sure that we accomplish the first goal before we move to the next goal. And then we usually start the show season not being at the low altitude targets or, as I talked about, in the really close formations. It takes that development and trust to get there. If you think about it, the rule's really simple. And the rule is for the leader, you tell the wingman, okay, I won't hit the ground, you don't hit me. And that's our rule.
Thank you, sir.
I'm looking at this Distinguished Flying Cross, Distinguished Graduate, Auburn University, Darden Executive Leadership, Bachelor of Science, Aviation Management at Auburn, Master of Business Administration, Troy University, Flight Safety Foundation, Corporate Advisory Committee, National Advisory Board, Museum of Aviation. I'm a book guy. Is there a book in this guy?
You know, I've been asked about that before, and I think it'd be a good thing to do, but I'm still having too much fun to sit down and write a book. So.
Okay. I want to thank a few people because we couldn't produce these events without them. Taylor Lyons, Taylor Mobley, these are students. Deepak Kumar, they all joined us this year, and we appreciate them. Vittorio Custodi, thank you. He is the one who looks like he belongs in The Sopranos. Tim Kristovich, Tony Petro, thank you. And for Mike working with you, Bob Score, a videographer. Chivalry Wu, who's taking the pictures, along with Jack Taylor, did those great, they call them the money shots from just beyond us. Also want to thank Lucino for his friendship and helping introduce us to Ron Mumm and to Dr. Watret for your support through this whole thing this year. We appreciate you, and I think I covered everyone. I want to tell you what's coming up when we come back this is the last event for the spring, September 12th. We're really looking forward to this one. Thanks to the support of Dr. Watret and Bill Hampton, we will present an evening with David McCullough, the author of the book, The Wright Brothers, September 12th. He will sign books, and I've watched David McCullough. His energy level is incredible. You're really going to enjoy it. Get here early. Doors will open at 6. Enjoy your summer. To Phil Kincaid, who produced our program on WNDB, thank you, Phil, for your good work, and this will be rebroadcast over 2 weekends beginning this weekend. Once again, and wishing you a happy summer, Lieutenant Colonel Ron Mumm.